On the morning of the 11th of March, 1868, officers of the Erie Railway left their West Street offices carrying company papers, securities, and cash toward the Jersey ferry. Behind them, a New York judge was preparing contempt proceedings. Across the Hudson, those orders could not simply follow. The men were not obscure fugitives. They included Daniel Drew, J. Gould, and James Fisk, directors of one of the largest railways in the United States. Their pursuer was Cornelius Vanderbilt, already the dominant figure in New York railroads. How had a contest for a railway produced newly printed shares, conflicting court orders, and a corporate government in exile? The answer begins with a paradox. Vanderbilt had tried to buy control of Erie. Erie Railway's directors answered by manufacturing more of the very thing he was buying. The Erie was more than a line on a stock table. Its predecessor had opened a full route from Piermont on the Hudson to Dunkirk on Lake Erie in May 1851. It linked the Atlantic market with the farms, towns, and waterways of the interior. By the late 1860s, that traffic made Erie a strategic rival to the Hudson River and New York Central lines associated with Vanderbilt. The company also carried an old weakness. Construction had consumed immense capital, and financial distress had placed the railroad in receivership in 1859. It emerged as the Erie Railway in 1861. The rails were real, but its treasury repeatedly needed money. That dependence gave unusual leverage to financiers who could lend cash quickly and accept company securities in return. One of them had been inside Erie for years. Daniel Drew was Erie's treasurer and its most experienced stock operator. In the spring of 1866, the company needed cash. It placed 28,000 unissued shares and $3 million in convertible bonds with Drew as security for a loan of $3.5 million. Drew was also selling Erie short, promising to deliver shares while expecting their price to fall. He then converted the bonds and released 58,000 shares into the market. A contemporary reconstruction recorded the quotation falling from about 95 to 50. The mechanism mattered more than the flourish. Drew could act as lender, treasurer, and speculator in the same transaction. He knew a new supply could appear because he helped control that supply. The Erie War would turn this conflict of duties into a weapon. By the autumn of 1867, the Erie Board contained Drew, J. Gould, and James Fisk. It also contained Frank Work, an ally of Vanderbilt. The alignment was unstable. Vanderbilt's side wanted influence over Erie and discussed arrangements that would coordinate traffic among competing trunk lines. Erie officials publicly described that prospect as monopoly. Vanderbilt's lawyers described the board's insider transactions as abuses requiring restraint. Both claims served private interests, and neither side entered the contest as a neutral guardian of shareholders. Gould brought patience and a command of corporate detail. Fisk brought speed, publicity, and close ties to brokerage houses. Drew brought the treasury and long practice in Erie stock. When cooperation failed, Vanderbilt began buying. To control the company, he needed a majority. The board's answer was to make the denominator larger. The legal attack opened on the 17th of February, 1868. In Frank Work's name, Vanderbilt's lawyers asked Justice George Gardner Barnard to restrain payments connected with Drew's earlier loan. A second proceeding sought Drew's removal. On the 3rd of March, Barnard barred the Erie Board from issuing more capital stock or converting further bonds while the case was heard, yet the board had prepared its answer. On the 19th of February, Erie's executive committee had authorized $10 million in convertible bonds. $5 million of bonds were sold immediately and converted into 50,000 shares held for Drew. The remaining bonds could produce 50,000 more. The company said it needed capital for double track, steel rail, and equipment. The timing and private arrangements also made the issue a means to break Vanderbilt's attempted corner. The second block of shares required paper certificates, and the court order now stood in the way. During the weekend of the 7th of March, Erie officers prepared certificates for rapid delivery. On Monday morning, a company messenger was told to carry books of unissued certificates from West Street to the transfer office in Pine Street. According to the contemporary record, Fisk met him outside, took the books, and departed. Erie counsel then went to Justice John Gilbert in Brooklyn. Gilbert refused one requested writ, but granted an injunction in another action. Its commands collided with Barnard's. One order told the directors not to convert. The other restrained interference and effectively told them not to refuse conversion. The contradiction supplied a narrow interval. The certificates moved from the company office toward Broad Street before another judge could close it. On the 10th of March, Erie opened near $80 a share and rose to $83 as Vanderbilt's brokers continued buying. Then 50,000 newly created shares arrived in blocks. The buyers absorbed them before their origin was widely understood. When fresh certificates became visible, Erie fell sharply to 71, then closed around 78. By the end of the contest, Vanderbilt's side had taken roughly 100,000 shares. Contemporary accounts placed about $7 million of his money in his opponent's hands. Yet his ownership percentage had not delivered control because the company had expanded the number of shares outstanding. Vanderbilt kept supporting the market, avoiding the wider panic that a collapse in his position might have caused. The corner had failed. The printing press, not the richest buyer, had decided the immediate result. The next morning brought the flight from West Street. Warned that contempt process was coming, Drew, Gould, Fisk, and other Erie officers crossed into New Jersey with books and assets. Contemporary reports described one carriage carrying about $6 million in currency. From the Erie station in Jersey City and from nearby Taylor's Hotel, the exiles continued company business beyond the immediate reach of New York orders. Newspapers called the hotel Fort Taylor. The name made the episode sound theatrical, but the jurisdictional fact was plain. A corporation whose railway crossed state lines could use the state line as a defensive wall. New Jersey soon granted Erie a corporate charter there. The contest had moved beyond a stock corner. Courts in New York had produced incompatible commands, and the directors had answered by moving the Treasury. The next battlefield was Albany. The New York Senate had ordered an inquiry on the 5th of March, and its committee first sat on the 10th of March as the stock fight reached its crisis. 2 reports emerged. One largely defended Erie. The other condemned the directors' conduct. Meanwhile, an Erie measure reached the Assembly, where it was defeated on the 27th of March by 83 votes to 32. Gould left Jersey City for Albany on the 30th of March to reverse that result. He was arrested under the contempt process the next day, posted security, and kept working around the capital. Public opposition to a Vanderbilt combination helped Erie. So did an expensive lobbying operation. The later official investigation found evidence of corrupt spending, but it did not establish every name and payment repeated in newspapers. That distinction is essential. The surviving investigation gives corruption a firmer outline than legend does. Drew testified that $500,000 had been drawn from the Erie Treasury, nominally for litigation. The Senate committee later found that large sums had gone to Albany without supporting vouchers, and that money was spent for corrupt purposes by parties interested in railway legislation. It did not identify every payer or recipient. What can be proved is the legislative reversal. On the 18th of April, the Senate passed the Erie measure by 17 votes to 12. The Assembly, which had rejected an earlier version, then approved it by 101 votes to 6. Governor Reuben Fenton signed it on the 21st of April. The law authorized Erie to use proceeds from the $10 million in bonds for completing, furnishing, and operating the railway, while restricting coordination with Vanderbilt's lines. Once the law was signed, the principals negotiated. The Erie exiles left their Jersey City headquarters in late April, but the full settlement was not formally announced to the board until the 2nd of July. Vanderbilt was relieved of 50,000 Erie shares at $70 each. Payment included $2.5 million in cash and $1.25 million in face value of Boston, Hartford, and Erie bonds, valued at 80 cents on the dollar. Erie also paid him $1 million for an option involving another 50,000 shares at the same price. Work and Richard Shell received a combined $429,250. Drew agreed to pay Erie $540,000 plus interest in exchange for a release of claims. A contemporary accounting put the cash drawn from Erie's treasury for the whole settlement near $9 million. The settlement did not restore ordinary corporate government. Drew withdrew from office. Gould and Fisk emerged with practical control, and Gould soon became Erie's president. Later in 1868, William Tweed and Peter Sweeney, leading figures in New York's Tammany organization, joined the Erie board. The alliance joined railway finance to the city's strongest political machine. Nor did the court proceedings deliver a proportionate reckoning. On the 30th of June, several directors were fined $10 each for technical contempt. Drew, Gould, and Fisk received no comparable punishment for the central stock operation. Vanderbilt recovered much of the money tied up in the contest, while the corporate treasury carried the settlement. The immediate winners changed seats. The shareholders remained in the same place, financing decisions they had neither designed nor approved. Returned to West Street on the 11th of March. The men rushing toward the ferry carried away cash, securities, and company books, but they could not carry away the record. Erie's own reports preserved its defense of the bond issue. The statute preserved exactly what Albany authorized. Legislative testimony preserved the unexplained withdrawals and the limits of what investigators could prove. Court papers and contemporary newspapers preserved the sequence of injunctions, certificates, and flight. Together they show why the Erie War is not a simple tale of one honest buyer cheated by 3 villains. It is a documented failure of fiduciary duty, corporate law, and public institutions exploited by every major faction. The final paradox survives on paper. Vanderbilt bought shares to capture a railway. The directors printed shares to save their control. Then the railway itself paid for peace.